Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Lugmapata Wash Processed Ecuador from One Line Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And One Line, based out of Heath, Ohio, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of a viewer-subscriber recommendation suggestion series where it took home first place as our favorite coffee on that table. And they were a suggestion to us by our good buddy Greg, so shout out to and thank you to Greg for the suggestion. This is One Line's second time appearing on the channel, as we had also reviewed the Yellow Honey Processed Costa Rica that was also featured in that same blind taste test rankings video. And the one thing we picked up from that coffee was it definitely grew on us over time. So the two questions we're going to look to answer with this coffee is if it follows that same trend, and if it retains its status as our favorite coffee from those 7 in that blind taste test. This right here is day 20 of this coffee. And One Line does have a brew guide on their website, and I feel like the reason that they go with their brew guide is to kind of show the spectrum of their coffees, because they do roast from very light to very dark. So as a result, I think it's kind of a recipe to encompass all of their coffees, which is a 17:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 200 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't particularly love that recipe, but when it came to this coffee, I feel like I couldn't mess it up, so that recipe works, but the recipe I went with was a pretty standard recipe, 16:1 water to coffee ratio brewed at 205 degrees Fahrenheit, and I like this coffee better through the Chemex. Now when it comes to roast profile, this one is also on the lighter side of coffees in general, so I'm willing to call this a light American for the roast profile. And with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. So day 4, which was that blind taste test rankings day, and I'll be completely honest, the biggest thing about this coffee from that blind taste test was the fact that I was picking it first based off of potential. It wasn't the sweetest cup of coffee on the table, it wasn't necessarily even the cleanest cup of coffee on that table, but it was the fruitiest cup of coffee on that table. And I think that helped differentiate that coffee from a lot of the other ones on the table. In addition to that, I could definitely tell that it was the lightest profiled cup of coffee on that table, so there was a huge amount of potential that was coming from that cup of coffee. And as a result, feeling that subtle fruit sweetness, I gave it a pretty positive first impression as a result, and I said, hey, we might be working with something really special here. Day 7, still working with the cup as just basically a lot of potential, and as mentioned in our last One Line review, they say wait at least 10 days before you start brewing their coffee. So here we are on day 7, and it still has a lot going against it. I mean, it had a lot going against it in that blind taste test being so early post-roast, and as a result, we were just getting a little bit of citric sweetness in general to complement a slight but distinct soft berry in the cup of coffee. So not too much, but we're still saying I feel like there's a lot of potential in this cup of coffee. Day 10 seen significant improvement for the first time being brewed, as the cup definitely is cashing in on all the potential fruits in plenty of abundance, as it has a cleaner strawberry to complement the really strong sugary sweetness. So yeah, finally, post day 10 mark, which is something we should have expected, coffee was really seeing a lot of the potential that we had expected from it. Day 12, cup is seemingly impossible to mess up, and that's one of the biggest themes I found from this cup of coffee is I actually tried to sabotage this coffee in a sense. I fiddled around with the recipe so much, not in the hopes of finding the best from this cup of coffee, but to see if there was any way I could actually mess up this cup of coffee, but I just kept finding better ways to enjoy this coffee, and in this case, brewing it through the Chemex, it was sweet, fruity in both methods, but this one it had some additional wonderful candy sweetness that really shines in the cup. It's pretty impressive in general. It was an excellent cup on this day as well. Best day I'd had for this coffee up to this point. Day 14, coffee continues to remind me of what was essentially a livelier version of the S. Nadir Ortega, which is a coffee we reviewed from Say earlier this year, and obviously given that it's from Say, it was a very light coffee, but my biggest complaint about that coffee was it was always verging on potential, as opposed to this one, which was a lot more vibrant, a lot more sweet, a lot more pronounced in its flavor profile. So as a result, I was enjoying it a lot more in that sense, as we were getting even more berry forward of a cup with some additional citric components to go with it, and a fair bit of florals too in the finish, and they were some really sweet florals, and that was a nice selling point to me. Quite enjoyable yet again. Day 17, another great day of vibrant depth, as the cup has a wonderful abundance of fruit flavors in general, ranging from the noted berry sweetness, which we've been harping on a lot, to a very strong citric sweetness as well, and those vibrant florals. I mean, they're not really sparing any sort of intensity when it comes to the flavors in this cup of coffee. High sweetness, excellent all around, another excellent day. And then on day 19, what's interesting about the berry is I can almost kind of describe it as near funky. So they do have a strawberry candy flavor note listed on here, and I could definitely see it skewing a little bit more towards a hard candy side of things because it is ever so slightly funky. It's almost to the point where it's so vibrant and funky that you could even say I could be tricked into thinking this is a natural, but at the same time, it's a really clean cup of coffee in general. So it has all of those things going for it. The vibrancy of a natural, the cleanliness of a wash, that's a really good combination right there. Cools off on the palate into a very sweet floral and citric finish. It's absolutely delightful, just so candy-like all around. Another great day of this coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. Is that 7 level 4s? So that's a lot of level 4s. Let's run through those real quick. So the sweetness, the cleanliness, and the finish, all at a level 4. And I always say when you get those at a level 4, we're always off to a good start. But this is on the sweeter side of that level 4. So it's definitely on the higher side of the level 4. It ended up being, I guess you could call it the second sweetest cup of coffee, and the sweetest if you don't count the natural processed Kenyan coffee that was overbearingly sweet. This is the best sweetness by far. This has the right amount of sweetness. It's on the higher side of that sweetness that I really enjoy, but definitely not to the point where it's overbearing. Wonderful, wonderful sweetness in this cup of coffee. It's high on the acidity, which I've always said I don't mind as long as you balance that out with the other factors in this cup of coffee, and it's higher on the sweetness than it is on the acidity, even if they both are on that level 4 mark. I actually pushed the acidity up to that level 4. There were times I was brewing it as hot as 208 to maybe try to get a little bit more out of this. As mentioned, I couldn't mess up this coffee no matter how I brewed it. Florals, higher on that level 4, yes, and they were a very sweet. They have a honeysuckle note listed on here, 100%, and it's definitely on the sweeter side of that honeysuckle. 100% agree with that. Berry fruit and citrus fruit. There were times the citrus fruit was a little bit more dominant. Typically when you're brewing it at higher temperatures, there were times the berry fruit was more dominant, especially when you brewed it through the Chemex. And it was wonderfully clean and sweet through the Chemex, and that's why I liked the Chemex a little better. Just wonderful strawberry coming out of the cup of coffee that way. Body, moderate, yeah, and not too much else honestly worth noting. The bitterness comes from, of course, a very strong citric component to this cup of coffee. But for the most part, I think this tasting wheel is a wonderful representation. You have a lot of these things on the higher side because it's just a well-rounded tasting wheel in terms of what I look for in a cup of coffee. All right, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, and I said it already, I went out of my way to try to mess up this coffee because I subscribe to the notion, and I very strongly subscribe to this notion, that if a cup of coffee is really good, no matter how you brew it, it will turn out really good. And this coffee did showcase that. This one was not just the best cup of coffee from that blind taste test on that day, but this one was by far the best cup of coffee I'd had from those 7. So I have some really positive things to say about both this coffee as well as One Line. And I've heard that some other coffee roasters have released this same coffee, and that's really exciting because I wonder if they did as nice of a job as One Line did with this coffee. As mentioned, it feels like an improved version of that Esnadir Ortega, which was always bordering on potential, whereas this one hit that potential. If you're going to hit those marks, cleanliness, fruitiness, sweetness, florals, I'm going to be a big fan of that coffee. And as a result, I would not be surprised if this coffee at the very least makes the honorable mentions list towards the end of the year for our favorite coffees of the year. So nothing but positive things to say about this one. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you really like your sweetness as I do, your clarity and lighter profiled cups of coffee, I have nothing but positive things to say about that because it had all of those components in addition to some wonderful floral sweetness. That floral sweetness is underrated in how much I've discussed it. It is absolutely great in this cup of coffee. So keep those factors in mind. Berry fruit really pronounced. The wonderful sweetness from the citrus was really good too. They have an orange note listed on here. Yes, that was in abundance too. Just great cup of coffee all around. For the most part, I think I'll leave this review at that. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee or anything else from One Line, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it or them as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Lugmapata wash processed Ecuador from One Line Coffee. Thank you for watching.